What takes place when one of Hollywood's most admired performers goes head-to-head with a morning show host convinced he can trap him with pointed, leading questions? What unfolded became one of the most intense exchanges ever seen on Good Morning America, and the escalation caught everyone off guard. The studio lights burned brightly that Tuesday as Denzel Washington eased into the cushioned chair opposite Michael Strahan. He was there to discuss his newest film, another addition to a career that had already spanned 4 decades. Yet there was an unusual tension in the air. Strahan's expression suggested this would not be a routine promotional chat filled with easy praise and predictable compliments. "So, Denzel," Strahan began, leaning in with a grin that seemed rehearsed, "let's get into your latest project. But before that, our audience would probably be interested in hearing about some of the, let's say, controversial remarks you've made lately about the business." Denzel lifted an eyebrow, calm but clearly attentive. "Controversial? I'm not exactly sure what you mean, Michael. I've been honest in my interviews." Strahan shuffled his papers deliberately. "You've spoken out about certain industry practices. Some people might say you sound ungrateful toward the system that's given you so much." The word lingered in the air. Denzel's jaw tightened ever so slightly, though his voice remained steady. "Ungrateful is an interesting description. I've spent 40 years building a career grounded in discipline and truth. If honesty makes anyone uneasy, that's not something I can control." Strahan reclined, seemingly pleased with the tension he had sparked. "But when you criticize the machine that helped make you a star, can look like you're biting the hand that feeds you." "The hand that feeds me," Denzel repeated, his tone lowering noticeably. "I've earned every opportunity I've received. I've shown up prepared, respected the craft and delivered performances audiences connect with. Nothing was handed to me." Sure, Strahan replied with a casual gesture. "But Hollywood has treated you well. Some argue that your comments about diversity and representation are simply fashionable talking points." The cameras captured the precise moment Denzel's expression shifted from polite professionalism to something far more resolute. "Fashionable? You think advocating for fairness and representation is a trend? I'm just pointing out," Strahan continued, pressing forward, "that these topics are very popular right now. Seems like everyone is jumping on the bandwagon." Denzel leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "Michael, let me ask you something. How long have you been working in television?" "I've been with Good Morning America for years," Strahan answered. "Before that I had my own talk show, and of course my football career. I've spent a lot of time in front of cameras. And in all that time," Denzel said evenly, "have you ever walked into a room and been the only person who looked like you? Have you ever had to prove you deserved to be there every single day?" Strahan shifted in his seat. "Football is a diverse sport, and television, it's different now than it used to be." "Different how?" Denzel asked quietly but firmly. "From where I'm sitting, your transition seemed pretty smooth. Former NFL star moves into television, lands a prime time slot, joins a national morning show. What doors were slammed in your face? Which roles were you told you couldn't have because of your appearance?" The studio had fallen silent except for the faint hum of equipment. Crew members stood still, watching the exchange unfold. Strahan's earlier confidence began to waver. "I'm not saying I haven't faced challenges. But we're here to talk about your film, right? Maybe we should steer back to that." "Oh, now we're talking about the movie." Denzel's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. "A moment ago you wanted to focus on so-called controversial statements and suggest I'm following trends. Which conversation are we having?" "I think you're misinterpreting my questions," Strahan replied, though his tone had lost its earlier certainty. "I'm trying to offer viewers a balanced perspective." "Balanced?" Denzel repeated softly. "Balance would mean asking about the work, about the craft, about why I choose certain stories and what they mean. Balance would involve showing the same level of respect you'd give any guest who has devoted 4 decades to mastering his profession." "I am respecting you," Strahan insisted, but the protest lacked force. Denzel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Respect isn't just about polite words. It's about intent. If you want to talk about my movie, let's talk about it. Let's discuss the characters, the preparation, the responsibility that comes with telling stories that reflect real experiences." He paused briefly, then continued. "When I speak about representation, it's not because it's popular. It's because I've lived long enough to see what happens when voices are excluded. I've seen talented people overlooked. I've seen doors closed for reasons that had nothing to do with ability." Strahan nodded stiffly, attempting to regain control. "No one is denying progress has been made. Progress doesn't mean the work is finished," Denzel replied. "And acknowledging that isn't ingratitude. It's awareness." The tension was palpable. What began as a routine segment had transformed into a pointed conversation about integrity, opportunity, and respect. Denzel's composure never cracked, but his message was unmistakable. He would not allow his advocacy to be trivialized or reframed as opportunism. As the seconds ticked by, the power dynamic in the room had clearly shifted. The host who had intended to corner his guest now seemed eager to move on, while the veteran actor remained steady and unflinching. In that brightly lit studio, beneath the glare of cameras and the weight of expectation, it became clear that this was more than a promotional stop. It was a reminder that experience, conviction, and authenticity carry a force that cannot easily be diminished or redirected. "Are you?" Denzel said evenly. "Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like you brought me here with a plan already in place. Like you decided what kind of narrative you wanted before I even stepped into the studio." The atmosphere shifted instantly. The tension in the room grew so dense it felt almost tangible. Crew members avoided eye contact, and the usual quiet movement behind the cameras came to a halt. Strahan glanced offstage toward the producers, searching for direction or reassurance, but none came. The red lights on the cameras stayed on, recording every strained second. "I think you might be taking this a bit personally," he said. The reaction was immediate. A subtle flash crossed Denzel's face. "Personally? Did you just describe me as taking this personally because I expect basic professional courtesy?" The word lingered like a spark hovering above dry tinder. Everyone present sensed the shift. Was the kind of misstep seasoned interviewers are trained to avoid, especially when speaking with someone whose career and reputation command respect. "You know something, Michael?" Denzel continued, his voice steady but carrying undeniable weight. "I've been doing interviews since long before you ever put on a football helmet. I've sat across from Barbara Walters, Oprah Winfrey, and Charlie Rose, professionals who understood that an interview is a dialogue between equals, not an attempt to corner someone." A flush crept up Strahan's face. "Wait a second, this isn't about cornering you. I'm asking real questions that viewers are curious about. Are they?" Denzel replied with a short, humorless laugh. "Or are you hoping for a viral clip? There's a line between journalism and performance, and right now it's not clear which side you think you're on." "I'm doing what I'm paid to do." Strahan shot back, the polished TV persona beginning to crack. "My job is to ask tough questions, not toss easy ones because you're a Hollywood icon." "Tough questions." Denzel leaned forward, his presence commanding the space. "If you want to ask tough questions, ask about the craft. Ask about the preparation that went into this role. The months of research, the emotional toll of embodying a complex character. Ask about collaborating with the director, about the themes we're exploring, about why the story matters. Those are challenging questions. What you're doing is chasing controversy." Strahan straightened up, attempting to regain his footing. "All right, maybe we've drifted a bit. Let me shift gears. Your new film tackles some heavy material. A few critics have said it might be too intense for broad audiences. What do you say to that?" For the first time in several minutes it seemed the exchange might steady itself. Denzel paused, reflecting. The studio seemed to exhale. "That's a fair point," he said at last, and Strahan visibly relaxed. "Yes, the film addresses difficult issues. We knew from the start it wouldn't be light viewing, but that's exactly why stories like this need to exist. Art isn't always meant to comfort you. Sometimes it's meant to challenge you, to push you to confront things you might prefer to ignore." "Sure." Strahan nodded, sensing an opening. "But don't you feel some responsibility to offer hope? A lot of your recent projects have been pretty dark." "Hope," Denzel repeated thoughtfully. "Hope doesn't always look like a neat, happy ending. Sometimes hope is found in truth. Sometimes it's about exposing problems so they can be addressed. Sometimes it's about letting people know they're not alone." "I understand that," Strahan said carefully. "But a lot of people go to the movies to escape. They want to relax, to be entertained. They don't want to feel like they're being lectured." There it was again, subtle but unmistakable, the implication that meaningful storytelling somehow bordered on self-importance. Denzel's expression hardened. "Lectured? Is that what you believe I do? That I stand on a set thinking about how to lecture audiences?" "No, that's not what I meant," Strahan said quickly, attempting to soften his words. "Then let's examine it," Denzel continued, his voice gaining intensity. "Because that mindset is exactly what keeps necessary stories from being told. The notion that art must always be comfortable. That it has to be easy to digest. That if you tackle serious themes you're somehow preaching." "I didn't say that," Strahan insisted, though the confidence had drained from his tone. "Then clarify it for me," Denzel said. "First, you suggest I should be grateful and quiet. Then you hint that speaking about equality is just following a trend. Now you imply that choosing substance over simple entertainment is a problem." Strahan shifted again in his seat. "I'm just raising points that some critics have made." "And I'm responding," Denzel replied firmly. But let's be clear about something. Entertainment and substance aren't opposites. You can tell a compelling story and still have depth. You can move an audience and make them reflect at the same time. The studio remained hushed. The exchange had evolved beyond a promotional segment into a deeper conversation about art, responsibility, and intention. I don't choose projects to chase applause. Denzel continued. I choose them because they say something meaningful. If that makes people uncomfortable, that's part of the process. Growth isn't always pleasant. Strahan nodded slowly, listening now rather than pushing. What concerns me, Denzel added, is the idea that seriousness equals arrogance, that challenging material equals preaching. That's a false equation. Stories have power. They shape how we see ourselves and each other. The red camera lights still glowed, capturing every word. What had begun as a tense standoff was now something else entirely. A discussion about the purpose of storytelling and the difference between stirring controversy and pursuing truth. Denzel leaned back slightly, his composure intact. If we're going to have this conversation, let's have it honestly. Let's talk about art as something that can entertain and enlighten at the same time. But let's not pretend that depth is a flaw. Help me understand what you're really asking of me, Denzel said, his voice controlled but edged with disbelief. By now the crew had stopped pretending to focus on their tasks. Several stood frozen, openly watching. This was no longer a routine promotional segment, it had turned into something raw and intensely personal. I want honesty, Strahan replied, his tone rising to meet Denzel's force. I want you to admit that maybe some of your recent comments and decisions sound self-righteous. The word landed like a lightning strike. A sharp intake of breath could be heard from somewhere off camera. On live television, he had just labeled one of the most respected figures in film as self-righteous. Denzel rose slowly from his chair. His full height and presence seemed to shift the energy in the room. Self-righteous. That's the word you're going with. I'm saying you should think about how what you say affects people? Strahan answered, standing as well, though he appeared far less commanding. Maybe consider whether your influence carries a responsibility to be more positive, more unifying. My responsibility, Denzel repeated, and now his voice carried the accumulated weight of decades in the business. Let me explain something about responsibility. Mine is to my craft, to the stories I choose to tell, to the truth. My responsibility is to young performers watching, to show them you can build a career on integrity. It's to audiences who expect authenticity when they buy a ticket. And what about not pushing people away? Strahan countered. What about bringing people together instead of driving wedges? Driving wedges. Denzel's eyes sharpened with unmistakable anger. Who exactly am I dividing? Those who believe equality matters from those who don't. Those who think representation is important from those who dismiss it. If that's what you call division, then I stand firmly where I stand. That's not what I meant. And you know it, Strahan snapped, frustration spilling through. Am I twisting your meaning? Denzel replied evenly. Because it sounds like you're suggesting I soften my stance on justice so people uncomfortable with change don't have to reflect on their own views. They were now standing face to face, the interview desk the only barrier between them. The cameras continued recording every charged second. Producers whispered urgently behind the scenes, debating whether to cut to commercial or allow the confrontation to unfold live across the country. You know what the issue is, Michael, Denzel said at last, his tone turning eerily calm. You've grown comfortable. You've been handed platforms and opportunities, and now you feel entitled to challenge people who had to fight for their seat at the table. I've fought for what I have. Strahan shot back, though the conviction in his voice faltered. Have you? Denzel tilted his head slightly. Tell me about the last time someone questioned whether you deserved to be in the room. When did you last have to prove not just your skill, but your basic worth as a human being? That's not fair, Strahan replied, but he looked cornered. Fair? Denzel gave a short, humorless laugh. You want to discuss fairness? Fair would have been doing thorough research before this interview. Fair would have been extending the same professional courtesy you'd offer anyone else with a lifetime of work behind them. Fair would have meant focusing on my art instead of chipping away at my character. Strahan glanced toward the crew for backup, but the faces looking back at him offered no comfort. Maybe we started off wrong, he said finally. Maybe we should reset and try again. Reset? Denzel shook his head slowly. We're far beyond that. You made deliberate choices today. You chose to frame your questions in a way that challenged my integrity. You questioned my motives and my character. That's not something you casually rewind. I wasn't attacking your character, Strahan insisted, though his voice wavered. Then what would you call it? Denzel pressed. You labeled me ungrateful. You implied I'm chasing trends. You described me as overly sensitive and self-righteous. You suggested my work is preachy and divisive. If that's not an attempt to undermine someone's character, what is it? The studio had fallen completely silent except for the faint hum of lights and cameras. Every eye was locked on the two men. I was trying to create balance, Strahan said weakly. Denzel repeated, stepping closer to the desk between them. Let me define balance for you. Balance is preparation. Balance is respect. Balance is asking thoughtful, informed questions that shed light instead of casting suspicion. He continued, unwavering. Balance isn't tossing around loaded words to provoke a reaction. It's not disguising personal judgment as curiosity. It's about elevating the conversation. Strahan swallowed hard, the earlier confidence gone. You want honesty, Denzel said. Here it is. I have no issue discussing my choices. I welcome dialogue. But there's a difference between dialogue and insinuation. Between inquiry and accusation. The tension in the room was almost suffocating. When you reduce advocacy for fairness to arrogance, you diminish the very real experiences behind it, Denzel added. When you frame integrity as self-importance, you discourage others from standing up at all. Strahan remained silent, absorbing the words. I've spent decades earning the trust of audiences, Denzel went on. That didn't happen by accident. It happened because I stayed consistent with my values. Because I didn't bend when it was inconvenient. He gestured toward the cameras. This platform matters. The way we use it matters. Words matter. And if we're going to talk about responsibility, then let's talk about the responsibility that comes with shaping narratives. The charged air lingered, heavy and unrelenting, as the two men stood locked in a confrontation that had moved far beyond a film promotion, and into something far more revealing about power, perception, and respect. What happened here today wasn't balance, Denzel said, his voice firm and unwavering. It was an ambush disguised as journalism. You're overreacting, Strahan replied, and the instant the words left his mouth, it was clear he had stumbled again. Denzel stared at him in disbelief. Overreacting? You're calling me dramatic for standing up to your unprofessional behavior. That's not what I meant. Strahan began, but Denzel cut in sharply. No, you know what? Maybe I am dramatic, he said, his tone intensifying. I'm dramatic because I'm exhausted. I'm tired of people who think they can disrespect me on national television, and then act shocked when I push back. I'm tired of being told to smile and feel grateful, while someone chips away at my character. I'm tired of defending my right to speak honestly just because the truth unsettles certain people. People like me. Strahan shot back, bristling. People who've never had to fight to be taken seriously. Denzel replied, his voice slicing through the studio air. People who mistake access for authority. People who think success gives them permission to punch down instead of lift others up. People who confuse having a platform with earning the wisdom to use it responsibly. I've worked hard for everything I have, Strahan countered. Have you worked hard enough to question my integrity? Denzel challenged. Have you earned the authority to suggest that my life's work is somehow flawed because it challenges audiences? Have you earned the right to call me ungrateful for speaking uncomfortable truths? Strahan opened his mouth but no response formed. He was visibly outmatched, facing someone who had spent decades navigating difficult conversations with composure and strength. I'll tell you what you've earned, Denzel continued, anger now unmistakable. You've earned a reputation as someone who tries to corner his guests. You've earned the distinction of attempting to undermine me on live television and failing. You've earned a moment that won't be remembered the way you hoped. Hold on, Strahan snapped, his own temper flaring. I don't have to stand here and let you insult me. Insult you? Denzel's voice surged. After everything you've thrown at me in the last 20 minutes. You question my character, my motives, my professionalism, and now you think me pointing out your mistakes is an insult. I think this conversation is done, Strahan declared, reaching for his microphone. Oh, now it's done. Denzel let out a sharp laugh devoid of humor. Now that you've delivered your jabs and gotten your confrontational clips, you're ready to shut it down. That's convenient. I don't have to endure this abuse, Strahan said, his voice trembling with anger and humiliation. Abuse. Denzel's tone dropped to a near whisper, yet it carried more force than his earlier outbursts. You call this abuse? This is accountability. This is what happens when you try to ambush someone who has spent longer in this industry than you've been in front of a camera. This is what happens when you mistake airtime for power and forget that respect has to be earned. The studio erupted into frantic motion as producers finally stepped in. Staff members rushed toward the set, unsure whether to intervene physically or simply diffuse the escalating confrontation. I want him out of this building, Strahan shouted, pointing at Denzel with a shaking hand. I want him barred from this network. This is unacceptable. Denzel glanced at the approaching security personnel and then back at Strahan. His expression shifted to something resembling disappointment. "You're right about one thing," he said calmly. "This situation is unacceptable. Your conduct today has been unacceptable, and I won't participate in it any longer." He began removing his microphone with deliberate movements, maintaining steady eye contact. "I came here to discuss my work," he continued, "to share something meaningful with your audience. Instead, I was interrogated by someone who showed no respect for me, my career, or the craft I've devoted my life to." "Security, escort him out," Strahan ordered, his voice cracking under the strain of trying to reclaim authority he no longer possessed. As security approached, Denzel raised a hand and turned toward one of the cameras that was still broadcasting. "To anyone watching," he said clearly, "remember this moment. This is what happens when a platform is used to tear down instead of elevate. This is what happens when preparation is replaced with provocation, when respect is sacrificed for ratings." "Cut the cameras," Strahan yelled, but the crew hesitated, uncertain whose command to follow. Denzel walked toward the exit with his head high, security flanking him but not touching him. Just before leaving the set, he paused and looked back. "I hope you reflect on this," he said evenly. Then he stepped off the stage, leaving behind stunned silence and a host struggling to regain composure. The cameras eventually went dark, but the impact lingered. In less than half an hour, what was meant to be a routine interview had spiraled into a public unraveling. The tension that filled the studio didn't dissipate immediately. Crew members exchanged uneasy glances, aware they had just witnessed something that would reverberate far beyond that morning's broadcast. What began as an attempt to challenge a respected actor had instead exposed a profound miscalculation, turning the spotlight in an entirely unexpected direction.